There was a very pragmatic reason for writing this book. I was teaching a course on human resource administration, and basically was dissatisfied with the textbooks that were available. They all more or less seemed to be very almost have the same table of contents, so they were presenting kind of a menu of what do you do if you have this job. You have to do X, and you have to do Y, and you have to do Z, and that sort of thing. And and furthermore, those books were more or less focused on a particular person in a school system who was the director of human resources for the school system. And I wanted to take a different look at human resource administration from a development point of view, and recognize, yes, you want to have someone at the school district level who handles a lot of the managerial aspects of the job, but that you want a school system that to my mind should be saturated with this notion that what we are all involved in ultimately is the human development of the young people attending our schools. And that for that to happen well, you have to have teachers who, in a sense, themselves are continuing to grow and to continuing to develop as a rich human being. And that therefore you need principals in the school, and you need assistant principals and department chairs who see part of their job, at least, as the development of the teachers they're working with. And then you need someone at the central office, not only who's managing that part of it, but you need someone at the central office who has a vision of what kind of human development are we looking for. So I was interested in a sense in writing a textbook for the course that I was trying to teach. But beyond that, I wanted to speak to folks like myself who were professors of educational leadership, or professors in a department of curriculum and teaching, or even professors in educational counseling, to try to emphasize that this point of view, that when you're a teacher, you're looking at the whole human development of the person, not just the development of the mind, but that as a matter of fact, if you're going to be really engaging the intellect of these young people, you have to engage the whole person, and that because the learning process itself is so much more than just a mental process. It involves so much your emotional life, your dream of who you are and who you want to be, relating to the academic areas. So so basically, the title of the book that says, school leadership, and by that I mean leadership at all levels of the school, should, in a sense, foreground this work of human development throughout the work of the school. I think the book is consistent with my other writings, my other publications. I would say that an earlier book I did was called Centering Educational Administration, Meaning, Community, and Responsibility. And this book would be, I think, a further elaboration of the kind of consistent professional work that principals and teachers do with youngsters. And it also is a further development of my thinking about how do you connect the academic curriculum with in a sense, the personal curriculum of the learner, which is to become a somebody, to become a competent person, and so forth, to be a member of the world, and so that the notion is not so much human development in the abstract, but it's the notion of human development to the point where you can begin to own yourself, where you can begin to claim your membership in the world of nature, in the world of culture, in the world of society, and participate fully in those worlds. So that also would tie into the work that I've continued doing in the area of ethical leadership, and I've just sent a book off for production now called Cultivating an Ethical School. And it seems to me that what I've done is incorporated the whole notion of human development now as coherent with ethical development, and that the educator has to recognize that during the kindergarten through 12th grade, that they are working on working with the student to develop those what I would call pre-ethical predispositions, which get emphasized during those school years. And those predispositions are around three what I call foundational qualities. The foundational quality of autonomy, the quality of connectedness, and the quality of transcendence. And that basically I'm saying that that a young person needs to develop that sense of autonomy so they really own themselves and take responsibility for themselves. But they're not so self-centered anymore. They recognize that they are really connected, that they are members of a variety of human communities, and that they're able now gradually to transcend self-interest. Because during the K-12 years, up until close to the 12th grade, the focus of most students is on me, okay? And you have to focus on me, because the me is the thing you're trying to develop into something real and something authentic. And but that gradually you want to be able to expand the focus from the focus on me to the focus on my connections to the world and my connections to other people, and how do I begin to let go of my own concerns and my own self-interest, to be open to the needs of other people, to the relationships with other people, and to exercising responsibility with other people, so forth. So the book is it's part of I guess the large fabric of my unfolding understanding of what are the essential things about education and leading in education. There are times when I want to throw out the term leadership, because I think it is overblown in the literature, that it's a rhetorical way of exaggerating the importance of what leaders do, and talk more about what actually you should be doing, and not talk about it as leadership, but just say that, you know, this is stuff that is really crucial to the teaching learning process and to your work with children. So but I guess the word leadership is used so frequently that it's an easy term. It's an easy term to use. And when I talk about distributed leadership or shared leadership, what I'm trying to communicate is that that teachers actually are leaders. They're leaders of their classrooms. And that assistant principals and principals are leaders of the whole school. And so the leadership of the teacher is much more highly focused, whereas the leadership of the principal is more general, to look at the whole environment and how that is consistent with the quality of the work that's going on and supports the quality of the work that's going on in the classroom. I'd also want to emphasize that there's the possibility and in a sense the desirability of developing student leadership. That in all of these cases we're talking about folks who have a job to do, and students have a job to do, folks who have a job to do and take responsibility to do it well, and to invite other people to join with them in the doing of it well. And so that you could look at that whole community as a community of people that are involved in doing something very well. And in the doing of that something very well, they share with one another their talents, their energies, their dreams, and so to speak. And that the collective energy of that community, in a sense, is it could be called, this is that the whole community has a quality, an organic quality of leadership to it. That means that they're committed to making a quality contribution to life. I think that clearly there are people in roles within the school. There's the person who's the principal, there's the person who's the department chair, there's the person who's the teacher, there's the person who's the superintendent. And that they exercise their leadership through dialogue. Now, I tend to write most of my books around the principal of the school. I tend to look at the school focus. And of course, once you do a good job at the school level, you don't want to stop there. You want to sort of engage the rest of the school district in discussions about the quality of the work that you're doing at this individual school that could be in one way or another repeated at another school. So I would say, well, let's look at the principal and ask the question, how does the principal go about creating an environment and inviting people into this environment where they will, in a sense, take proactive responsibility to increase the quality of the work of the people they work with. And you're going to do that mainly through dialogue, that basically you're going to sit down and not say to people, this is what I want you to do, but you sit down with people and say, let's look at what it is we're trying to do. Let's ask the question, why do we do what we do? And invite people that we're talking with, in this case, the teaching faculty. Why do we do what we do? And let them talk about it. And that gradually, through that conversation, you begin to get a sense of an emerging sense of what's the value, what's the significance behind what they do and how they see that. And that value is what brings them to work every day, to promote that value, to enact that value, to develop that value. And so as they talk about that, you as the principal can then begin to say, all right, here's what I'm hearing you say. Here's what I'm hearing you say. This is why we do what we do. And but are we doing it somehow in a coherent way, so that what the individual people, that what we do individually, actually complements what other people are doing individually, so that we can say, yeah, there's a collective effort going on here that really works together in some kind of synchronicity, in almost an intuitive way, and say, okay, are there ways in which we can now discover more intentionally ways in which we can complement one another's work? And so you might say some teachers might be very, very capable at working with special needs children. But you have teachers over here who don't quite feel comfortable yet in working with them. And so you say, okay, let's get together and see what you can learn from one another. You might find someone else who is very comfortable working with second language learners, or other people over here haven't a clue how to do it. And so You get those folks. Even though the same value that they espouse is there, and you can get them to say, okay, let's make that value, in a sense, more valuable, so to speak. And so that the leadership of the principal is very much dialogical, with the awareness that the principal doesn't have ownership of all the great ideas. That if you invite people to talk about what they really value, it's going to come out. And as they talk about it, you can start to reinforce, yes, cheerlead that kind of stuff. So that because teachers in the tumultuous daily schedule, they don't ever talk about this stuff among themselves. They don't talk about the really significant things. It's sort of like, how did you get through the day? Or let me tell you about this mess that I had in my classroom. So the principal needs to not every day, but in all kinds of ways, continue to get them to talk about the real significance of what it is they're doing, and that they can then more intentionally, I think, start to communicate with the students about the significance of what they're doing. You can have a teacher who says, well, I'm really trying in the long run to help kids learn what it's going to take to live in a democracy. And say, oh, okay. Let's look at what you do, therefore, to do that. And what do other people say about it? Are you teaching kids to eventually be able to learn in a democracy? And what does it mean to you, and that sort of thing? And so you might be able to take that idea and start to massage it in ways that it becomes much more productive. Because sometimes teachers say, well, yeah, I too am trying to teach kids to be able to learn to live in a democracy, but I'm not really very good at it. And you find that a lot of people who talk the game aren't very good at it. And so you get together and say, this is the game we're playing, so let's try to do it better. That kind of thing. So I see leadership as very dialogical, and with the teachers and the students, it's got to be dialogical too. You got to get inside the students' heads to find out what's going on in their life and start to cheerlead those signs of value. So that would be sort of my basic, if you want to call it, my basic leadership strategy. But it's got to stay focused on the teaching and learning process. Because I think all too often principals and teachers get absorbed in issues around control and discipline and that sort of thing, and that starts to push aside the centrality of the teaching and learning process. I tend to think that probably in most schools of education, that the professors tacitly deal with this, if not expressly deal with it. And it's just inconceivable to me that a person would graduate from a school of education without having heard the word of human development, or having heard the word about quality learning, or having heard the word about relating learning to real life, and about in a sense, the significance of what we do as a teacher, the value that's embedded in our work, and that sort of thing. What I sometimes worry about, and it also applies to our work in a program of educational leadership, is how do you take the individual courses where there's a lot of good things going on, and look at how they are organically related to one another. Is there a large picture that, in a sense, is constructed out of the fabric of all these individual courses? And because that, I think, is really important. You can go out saying, well, I know how to teach grammar, and I know how to teach Shakespeare, and I know how to teach oral recitation. But what's the significance to the human being who's learning all this stuff? How do I teach it in such a way that the youngsters take all that learning inside, and it becomes part of them, part of the way they think about themselves, and they express themselves, and express values. And it's that larger picture that I think we may not be doing as good a job as we might, and that's, I guess, why I saw the theme of the human development of young people as encompassing all of the kind of, or in an organic way, all the strands of skills and understandings that we're trying to teach them.